When he finished the 2,000 meters, he waited for Walter. 2 minutes passed. There was no sign of Walter. The Canadian, hit even harder by the fog, came in about 30 seconds later. No race there. Then Wood went back and started taking apart the rigging of his boat. He did it just when he knew John Biglow was going to race. He was immensely fond of John, but he could not bear to watch him row in the singles. It was simply too painful.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I think Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back are much better movies than the prequels. Mm-hmm. It's why Jaws is a much better movie than Jurassic Park. You hardly ever see the shark, and only really once, and it's in a moment where all the shark has to do is flop up onto the deck, and then all of it's conveyed by, you know, Robert Shaw's performance as he gets chewed up and stabs the monster in the face, you know, screaming. Yeah. And like that, because that performance is so amazing, you don't notice that the rubber shark isn't really moving. It's just teeth. You know?
It's just sort of, it's like gumming Robert Shaw to death.
But it really is there, you know. Yeah, you
totally.
know, and so that's all you got to do is like stick his legs into that mouth and throw some fake blood around and have him screaming and stabbing. And but anyway,
well, I mean, I think some of our discussion about, you know, how much the creator is doing for us is really pertinent in the second half of David Halberstam's The Amateurs, which we are covering tonight. You're the host, so I'll let you kick off our recap.
Yeah. So the very first chapter of the second half is the trials of the single scull Olympic trials, which is the event that the entire first half of the book is building to. At this point, it doesn't feel that surprising that Biglow wins the trials. Brad Lewis is a bit of a surprise, coming in second, and Tiffwood has a bad day, and he is third. Tiffwood is not rowing well. Biglow and Lewis are both rowing very well, and Biglow, I also think, is, you know, there's been enough set up that he is probably the best rower in that he combines Tiffwood's strength with the other's technique too. He might not be quite as strong as Tiff, but he's has much better technique and stamina, and rows a good race. And so that feels a little bit anticlimactic. Tiffwood is very disappointment. And then for basically, I would say the second half is sort of divided in and of itself into two halves. And one of those halves is essentially the Olympic training camp that determines what the other boats will be. And in particular, there's a lot of focus on the double, but also quad, sculling. We're not focusing on the rowers, the shells. We're focusing on sculling, the people who row two oars at the same time.
Two oars at the same time.
And one of the stakes becomes, is Tiffwood going to get a boat at all? Because he hasn't been practicing in a double or a quad. There's tension between it seems like all the rowers and Parker, the coaches, and one another. The coaches have some
US
tension.
The US rowing committee.
Yeah, there's we learned that Parker is only coaching the scullers. And there's this Polish expat refugee who's coaching the rowers in the shells, and Parker's upset about that, but he's also supposed to be coaching Harvard at this time too, and Harvard's not doing particularly well. These people's egos are fragile and thin, it seems like, but of course, you know, there is a relationship between that and their motivation in racing and rowing, which is a lot of what the book explores. I think there are a lot of interesting subplots. To me, the most interesting subplot of what we could call the third quarter of the book is Brad Lewis.
Absolutely.
And he's just a gift to David Halberstam as a writer, because he is a wonderful fly in the ointment. He doesn't fit in thematically. He doesn't fit in socially. He doesn't cooperate, just when Parker has kind of written him off. He forms this challenge boat with Paul Enquist and kind of uses his sense of grievance as motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Also, he kind of is out to prove that Parker has made a mistake and picked the wrong pair for a double, and he's probably right. I think we're given to understand that Brad Lewis is grieving. Brad Lewis is kind of an asshole, but he's not. He's just like Walter in The Big Lebowski.
Yeah,
he's
I was
not
just about
entirely
to say.
wrong.
Am I wrong? No, you're just an asshole.
Right. Exactly. He's a little bit of both. So that is a sort of essential part of that kind of third quarter. Another thing is that Tifwood doesn't make a boat. He just kind of really goes on a skid. He's not rowing well. He's never been good in doubles or quads. He's not good at rowing with other people, even though he's incredibly strong. So this is represented as kind of another subplot. So what kind of that half is sort of concluded with, in fact, Brad Lewis and Enquist's challenge is successful. They have a time trial and they win, so they get to become the Olympic boat, and then they're scrambling for who's going to be the quad, and there's like a brief challenge quad, but that doesn't really go anywhere, and that takes us to the Olympics, and I'll let you start there.
Yeah, and the Olympics are, I mean, like, what you said about David Halberstam being given a gift by Brad Lewis is, like, it is so fulfilled in the Olympic section of this, where John Biglow, he doesn't win his heat outright, so he has to go into the repechage, which is, sort of this, like, secondary path. A lot of rowing and a lot of endurance competitions are kind of a double elimination bracket a lot of the time. And so Biglow manages to get in the finals, but he has to row Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. He's got to row the heats, he's got to row the reps, and then he has to row the semifinal. He does all of those. He gets into the final. And he comes in fourth. He gets the wooden medal or the potato medal. Yep. Pick your moniker for coming in fourth. But there's this wonderful section where, like, he feels really disappointed, and then also gets to see a lot of pictures of himself later of that day, and he's like, I look really happy.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is about him sort of wrestling with, do I continue to row or not? But he seems satisfied for a little bit.
And a real theme that, like, he can kind of rest finally.
Yes.
And that he doesn't have anybody's expectations to live up to finally, for the first time that he can remember in a very long time.
And that's a lot of what is going on in this book. I mean, these are young men. Yep. Like, our oldest rower is, 31 or something. Yep. Maybe Jim Dietz is a little older than that. Jim Dietz is, like, I think 35 or 36. But, like, most of these characters are just beginning their adult careers, but they've been under, just enormous pressure, mostly self-imposed, for their young adult lives. And you sort of begin to wonder, like, is this a feeling that Tifwood is not going to get to have? Yeah. This feeling of being able to rest. And then, in this further gift, holy shit, Brad Lewis and Paul Enquist win a gold medal, which is, like, wildly unheard of at the Olympics.
For Americans,
great.
too.
For Americans,
somebody always does win a gold.
Somebody always.
It's not.
It was the first. For
the first time in a very long time, we're going to award a gold medal.
Nobody sank. Right? Yeah. The Olympic rowing regatta is just this, like, chaos of ships sinking everywhere.
If 3 boats can cross the finish, you all get medals, but that never happens.
Yeah. It never happens. There is a great party on Woods Hole every year of a boat race where you can enter any boat you want as long as it is not a conventional boat. And it is, it's marvelous. It's the best. But yeah, so Lewis and Enquist win their gold, and a lot of the sort of final wrap up chapters are also about the different characters' relationships with Harry Parker, our sort of coach who hovers over all of this.
Everybody,
some of those relationships
coda,
are
right? Like each major character. Well, the 4 single scholars and Parker, who I would say are the 5 main characters, all get a little coda chapter.
Yeah. And we close with a very short chapter where Lewis kind of drops one final bon mot, which is that if you're a rower and you actually want to get any attention, you just have to go stand behind the gymnasts at the Olympics, and you will get your picture taken a lot.
Another swipe at what's happened to amateur athletics in the United States.
Exactly. And there we are. That kind of gets us there. It's very funny. The first half of this book, covers pretty much half of the page count in 12 chapters. And then that same, or maybe even slightly less page count is covered in 21 incredibly short chapters in the second half of this book. And that's something I want to talk about.
There's basically twice as much action in the second half of the book as in the first half, at least in terms of chronological action, whereas the first half has a lot more flashback and the second half has very little flashback. We get a little bit, I think there's a little bit more development we get Joe Biglow's coach, I think, and we get a little bit of Brad Lewis's history and his family. But I want to start us with a reading. So this is just before the double skull trials. It's kind of a replay of the climax of the action of the first half of the book, but this is for the double. And we have 3 boats. There's the camp boat, Altacruz and Buscarin, and there are 2 challenge boats, one of which is Brad Lewis and Paul Enquist's. We're kind of viewing it from Lewis and Enquist's perspective. The first race, again at Princeton, was to be on Saturday. Although most of the other oarsmen started showing up on Wednesday to work out, Lewis and Enquist appeared on Friday. They were warriors now, confident, almost arrogant. They stayed at a more expensive motel to be away from everyone else. They won their heat on Saturday by 6 lengths. On Sunday, Tony Johnson, who had helped coach them at Cornell and who was looking out for their interests during this miniature regatta, had gone to see them as they left the boathouse for the race. He wished them good luck. "We're going to kick the shit out of them today," Lewis had said. Johnson was bothered not so much by the obscenity, but by the fury with which it had been said. That kind of fury was not necessarily an asset in a race, for it could burn out too quickly, and in a 6-minute race the pair might easily come apart at the end. Oarsmen did not normally talk like that. But Johnson finally decided that both men knew what they were doing, and he did not doubt the outcome. Lewis and Enquist rowed down to the start and settled into the stake boats that held the sculls at the start of the race. Altacruz and Buscarin were in the next lane. Lewis heard one of their voices, Altacruz's, he was sure, wishing them good luck. Neither he nor Enquist spoke, nor did they turn their heads. He thought he heard Altacruz say something else. Again, they did not acknowledge him. This race was not about friendship. Brad Lewis had found the perfect role for himself. The outsider spurned by authorities. The challenger versus the favorite who had been given all the advantages. He was absolutely comfortable. Absolutely ready.
It's a great setup.
It's a great setup,
scene.
and I don't know that writers are so bold these days. It's astonishingly bold to go so big in a book that is also so small. It has a real ring of whoever wrote the narration for the Sports Illustrated, football documentaries that were always being advertised in the early 90s, Warriors
so
on
good.
the Gridiron, that were all about Dick Butkus and Joe Namath and those demigods of the late 1960s of football.
The Immaculate Reception,
all of
again
that
and
stuff,
again.
all of that stuff. Lots of slow motion, lots of warriors approaching the da-da-da. I wonder who did the voicing for that. And that series, at the time, it felt kind of goofy, but I'm sure it's sort of legendary now. I'd love to go watch those documentaries. I'm sure they're super fun. It has that quality, right? They were warriors now. But to me, the central insight here, and what so much of the second half of the book is also set up, is that Brad Lewis had found the perfect role for himself, the outsider spurned by authorities, the challenger versus the favorite who had been given all the advantages. He was absolutely comfortable, absolutely ready. And I think that there are a few other places where we're given to understand that Harry Parker has kind of like accidentally perfectly motivated Brad Lewis. You know, that Brad Lewis is a fly in the ointment. He's a misfit. He's uncomfortable around these Eastern snobs. He's also uncomfortable with the kind of chumminess and the conviviality, the kind of genteel quality that these other boatsmen have with one another. And he's been dissed. You know, he got offered to be like the spare at the Lucerne Regatta, which is, you know, the sort of forerunner to the Olympics, and or maybe the eighth man in a boat or something. Yeah, I guess spare, basically. It is a little bit complicated. I don't quite understand what he was being offered, but it was not a high status role, and that's when he turned it down and decided to do a challenge boat. And what's kind of amazing about Halberstam is that he both makes me not like Brad Lewis very much, and also completely root and cheer Brad Lewis when he decides to join the challenge boat. Like, we get so much, and so I don't know. I love this section, but I also love how well it how much characterization is happening, how much setup, and how unsurprising it is when, in fact, Lewis and Enquist win. It does, in fact, feel inevitable. It would feel strange otherwise. And also, the thing that feels very relatable and universal here is, like, whenever you're endeavoring to do anything, just how valuable having just a little bit of a chip on your shoulder can be, and the confident sense that you've been underestimated, how powerful that can be too.
And, you know, and there are so many, I mean, a lot of our principles that do well in this book have that. Biglow has it for sure.
Yeah.
Like Biglow has a definite chip on his shoulder. He doesn't fit in. He's really awkward.
Yep.
He really doesn't understand the social mores of the Northeast and
not
of
a great
schools.
student, you know, struggles with dyslexia. Yeah. And also is a bit snobby about, like, not being as obviously big and strong as other rowers and still being able to beat them too, which is like Brad Lewis has even more of that. It's almost like there's a continuum between Brad Lewis and Tiff Wood, and then Buscarin is sort of orbiting around all of them, and then Biglow is maybe at the center of it though, because he absorbs all three of the best qualities of the other three and is able to combine them.
Yeah, he has enough. Like, usually the best athlete is the one that has most of the gifts mostly well developed. You know, and the wild thing about this book is that Brad Lewis basically, like, sees the landscape, figures out what he needs to do, and just goes and does it.
Yeah.
And Biglow wins the sculling trials, but then it sort of flounders for the rest of the book. And the fact that he gets the wooden medal is sort of perfect for him. And Wood, who also really does have a chip on his shoulder about, like, I had the 1980s Olympics taken away from me in 76. I wasn't quite ready. This is supposed to be my year. But it just is one of those things where it's like, Wood is just, he never quite works on the technique part enough. Like, it
part
just,
of that's
he seems
to, you know, that Parker is Parker also favors him, is one of the things we get. And because of that, kind of protects him in a way that maybe doesn't ultimately do him favors, it seems. But
like, Parker's system doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Like, it's like when your question about heroes and villains in here, like, weirdly, Brad Lewis becomes the hero of this book to me, mostly because of his resourcefulness, his ability to be flexible, his ability to make a plan, and to step outside of this chummy, hermetic world of rowing. And he's like, fuck that. I just want to be an athlete. And like this whole mess of like Parker, the sweeps get taken away from him. He's trying to coach Harvard. He's trying to do this. He's mismanaging everything. I'm sure he's an excellent coach, but the second half of this book, you start just being like, oh my God, this is all Harry Parker's fault.
It is, although one also senses that it's like the culture of sculling to some degree too, because I mean, a thought experiment, what if Joe Biglow cared about meddling in any boat as much as they care about, and Tiff Wood as much as they care about being the single sculler? What do you think would happen in that scenario?
It would be a much worse book.
Yeah.
and probably wouldn't
there'd
have
be a
gotten
quad
written.
with like Bouskarin, Wood, Lewis, and Biglow, or there'd be a double with Wood and Biglow, and they would actually spend their time that they spent single sculling learning how to row together, and they'd be faster than they'd probably they'd be fast. I mean, maybe Enquist and Lewis is a better double than anybody. Maybe they're like the perfect combination. But you would think that at least Bouskarin and Biglow would find their way into a successful boat, which they do not. Right. And it makes you wonder: would Biglow be better off? If he just wanted to be in the quad all along, like, could he have made a really good quad with some of these other talented rowers? But no, they all want to be the single skull, and like, Biglow can't hang with the Europeans. Like, he's the best American single sculler, but Americans aren't as good at that, and their best chance is to combine their talent in a boat, and they won't do it because they're too, or they won't do it until they're desperate, which is exactly what Winston Churchill says about Americans.
Yes, right. They have to scramble, and then they're doing stuff like throwing boats together at the last minute when the Europeans are like have been rowing the same organization for 8 years or something, and you're like, maybe instead of a single gold medal, that revised system generates a more successful American trip. Maybe it's like 2 bronzes and a gold in the scullers, which would have been like, revolutionary for America in the 80s in rowing. Again, a much less compelling book.
And Parker knows it too, but he can't make it happen. But partly it's because of his own rigidity and playing favorites and kind of poor planning. But all this sets up, is there a villain in this book? And is there, a good story needs heroes and villains. Does this story have heroes and villains?
No, but like, as you were sort of talking through this, like, and this kind of, this somewhat pre-anticipates my trivia question, like, who are we talking about here? What are David Halberstam's other obsessions other than, baseball?
Vietnam.
And,
And I don't know. He's known for his Vietnam reporting. Did he do some kind of like Watergate adjacent reporting as well?
Yeah, and then also just like tons of American cultural, historical and political cultural report. Right. And so he's obsessed with conflict, sport, and Americans. Yeah. And I think that like, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I think, one of the probably why this situation interested David Halberstam is the problem is not these particular characters. Like, yes, they all have egos and they all have all of the normal human traits. The problem is the structure that they are existing inside of, which, like, you're like, yes, like, Vietnam, bad idea. Perhaps inevitable given the structures that were kind of like around and going on at that time. And that's what Halberstam wants to chronicle, is like, I want to give you the humans inside this pretty crappy situation.
Yeah.
And so I think the villain in this particular case is basically like this small, sealed, hermetic, insular world of rowing, which, yes, has nobility, but also just perfectly sets up these internecine squabbles.
Is it also, does it have something to do, though, with the kind of broader culture's fascination with the glamour and patriotism of the Olympics more broadly, and how those things do not really intersect? You know, that because these rowers are also neglected. There's no funding. There's no advertising revenue. There's no. At one point, I think it's at the end of one of the major races, they cut away to a McDonald's commercial.
Yeah, exactly. In the middle of the race,
we don't even see who wins, right? Like, did you know that this entire book was researched after the 1984 Olympics?
Wow. Good for him.
I assumed that he chose to tell this story sometime like 6 months before, before. Like I assumed that he was like, oh, I know that some of these crew guys are preparing for the trials, the Olympic trials. I'm going to profile them in the midst of that.
Yeah.
Apparently not. Apparently, all of that material we get about, like, they drove down to Princeton together, and Bouskarin was in Biglow's car, and they stayed at so-and-so's house, and they borrowed a skull from so-and-so, and he wouldn't let them borrow the skull, and they worked out at the boathouse all winter. That was all assembled from interviews he did, like, a year after those events, and the outcome was known to everybody. Which is, it's extraordinary to me. I would argue another way of looking at it is that I sort of agree. I mean, I don't disagree with what you said about the structure being the villain, but I would also argue, for the sake of drama, that all of the characters take turns being heroes and villains.
Being the villain, yes, yeah. And I think that's, maybe that's what I'm saying about the structure. And I think the anecdote that I would point to is this completely absurd anecdote about Wood trying to get a boat at a certain point, and he has a connection, and this connection really likes him.
Yeah.
And she had sort of anticipated maybe this is going to happen. And so in the lease that she wrote to U.S. Rowing, she had it expire the week before this second trials.
Extraordinary foresight, act of foresight.
And you're the only way you have that foresight is if you have enough experience of a governing body like that to be like, oh, this place is fucked. But I think you're right. And that's what, because Halberstam he's a great chronicler of ambivalence.
Yeah.
One of his books is called, Recipe for a Quagmire. It is very obvious what his point of view is there. But in all of his Vietnam writing, it's more about I can't really figure out who is wrong here.
Yeah. Or it's humans muddling through, not necessarily with poor intentions, but with weakness.
Yeah, totally.
With weakness, and in some cases with hubris, and in some cases with not enough power, and in some cases with too much power, and in some cases being influenced by hurt feelings and sensitivities that you could scoff at, but are also, relatable. And I mean, there's this moment where one of the coaches says to Harry Parker, Brad Lewis needs more encouragement. And he says, sometimes the people who need love the most deserve it the least.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just because it is. You're right. The system is sort of doomed to failure in a certain way. And what's interesting is all the characters in it are kind of both victimized by it and perpetuating it in a way. And I don't know, if you have a choice, it is better to be rich than poor. But it can be hard to be rich. And it can certainly be hard to be a rich young man who wants to prove himself and also has the expectations of, how many of these guys are in medical school,
Right.
I know. And which I guess I assume medical school is that is the place you go if you're not a business person, but you have to achieve the expectations of kind of wealth and status of your family. Medical school or law school, or you go work at an investment bank, are kind of the three paths to, you're going to be upper middle class, and all you have to do is be pretty smart and work very hard. And so you don't have to be exceptionally smart. You just have to be pretty smart, well educated. So in a way, it's kind of a safe path, but it's not an easy path, No. And I mean, there is something noble about it, but it's just fascinating to me. Is it Buscarin who takes the job at the end, like
at the special surgery center, and he struggles with
it because he won't be able to row so much, and he's considering taking a less prestigious job at an emergency room because that would allow him to keep rowing, which is an interesting anecdote.
But I think you're also right that, like, I mean, it's called The Amateurs, and you brought up the fact that this is about the friction of amateur sport coming up against the Olympics.
Yeah.
And
which is, at this point,
like,
already semi-professionalized.
Right. Yeah, we're well underway in that direction. The Olympics are becoming less about they're both becoming less about individual country glory and more about individual country glory. But as that professionalism is sort of taking root in the sport, and I think a part of the critique that's going on here, is like a lot of the other sports are better set up to weather that change.
Yeah.
Basketball, that was a fairly easy transition, but a sport like rowing, which people aren't interested in, there's that great moment when Tiff Wood ends up like getting interviewed, even though he doesn't get on the team. Yeah. And they're like, the Russians not being there will make a medal less sweet. He's like, all medals are sweet. Yeah. And then he's like, no one goes and sees the rowing anyway. And I think another thing. Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot like poetry.
It's like the poetry of the Olympics.
The poetry of the sport world.
Yeah. Everybody knows each other. Everybody likes each other and is jealous of one another. Yeah. Minus everybody sleeping with one another.
Maybe that just didn't make it into the reporting.
Make it in the book. It was a different. Halberstam was more. Yeah. Well, we don't hear anything about women's crew and women's rowing and how that interferes. Mm-hmm. I think there's one scene where like Tiff Wood or Biglow goes and like...
He's like out rowing against the Great Britain Four.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and he's like, that's a good competitive race for me. Do you feel that the mood and the atmosphere, do you feel like there's a distinct shift from the first half of the second half of the book? And again, everybody, mood, atmosphere, we're talking about the overwhelming emotional timbre of a piece of work.
Huh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about whether that had shifted, so I'm just going to gather my thoughts about that and think out loud a little bit. To me, the mood of the first half of the book was this sort of really set by the first chapter of this sense of tense competition. That here were 3 or 4 people who more or less liked each other and regarded each other, but were also serious rivals. And you kind of almost get the, like, stomach butterfly knots of like driving to the scene. And then by comparison, I don't know, to me the second half actually feels sort of more whimsical. More happens, at least chronologically. It feels to me like there's more anecdotes. It's less thoughtful. To me it feels more lively in a way, although I don't know if that's really mood or if that's more like pacing. So that's a good question. I also feel like, that this is sort of, is the mood, there is this kind of dourness throughout, this sense of, you get, Halberstam's voice is so muted, but it comes across from time to time in this sort of like muted disapproval of a lot of what we're experiencing. And it's fascinating to me too, because, and I guess that's sort of bordering on tone too, but I think the tone is sort of more like an argument, but this just sort of sense of like kind of amused dourness of these anecdotes of people, little petty jealousies and minor revenge and things like that. But I don't know, how do you perceive it? Because I don't know. I'm not necessarily trusting my immediate answer to what you said.
No, I totally agree with you. The first half of the book feels a lot simpler.
Yeah.
And I think that's intentional. We're talking about one race. We're talking about one race of single scullers.
It feels
like
contemplative to me too. Like last time I was talking about that spiral galaxy, that sense of like we're taking this one event and then we're going to zoom out from there and kind of tell everybody's journey to get here. But with a lot of reflection, a lot of musing along the way.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to continue your astronomical metaphor here. There is a different type of galaxy called a globular cluster.
Yeah.
And it's a fucking mess. Right. It's like, for whatever reason, it doesn't have the kind of necessary spin to organize that amount of mass into the beautiful spiral arm galaxy shape. And sure, a globular cluster still has a dense core of stars, but it's just a mess. Yeah. It's sort of this chaotic thing. And I feel like the second half of the book, I also pick up on that kind of disapproval, which you're right, that's more tone. But the atmosphere does seem to sour for me because things get so much more complicated.
Yeah.
Like there are doubles and there are quads and the sweeps get taken away from Parker. And it's like after the single skull trials, it's like we've been thrown out of the garden.
Yeah, what's it?
And
okay, yeah, continue.
And it's like, and Parker even says at one point that he has opened up a Pandora's box. Yep. Everybody, it's a jar, it's not a box. But the second half of the book really feels. Pandora's Amphora. That's a great one. That's a band name right there.
Pandora's Amphora.
Pandora's Amphora. They're okay. I'm not going to go down that digression. I want to, but I'm not. It feels the mood of the second half of the book feels to me like, ugh, this is what happens. Like it sours, and then, I sort of imagine, like you said, Halberstam sort of discovers the story afterwards, that without Brad Lewis, I bet he doesn't write the book.
Yeah.
Because I think it would just be a series of petty squabbles, but you get this extra piece of architecture of Lewis being like, I am going to step outside of these petty squabbles and just fucking win the race.
Brad Lewis is Captain Happen, right? Like,
yes, you're right. He is a Captain Happen.
He's Avi in Cryptonomicon.
Absolutely.
He's the fly in the ointment.
Yeah.
The beginning of chapter 17 starts with a sentence: "If rowing was an estimable sport filled with virtue and honor and strength, then there was something about the team camps that was the reverse of that."
Exactly. And maybe that's what I'm picking up.
Yeah. And I mean, what's interesting though, because part of what you're talking about is structure too. And there's a relationship between the mood and structure, and you're describing it as a globular cluster. I do find though that the second half of the book, even though there's all these anecdotes, it sorts itself into this sort of structural map to me, where the first half of the book, there's one event and the stakes are around that event, the single skull trials. The second half of the book, there are two events. And then at this point, there are 5 main characters. And so basically, there are 10 sets of stakes, because we get the 5 stakes for the characters in the second half of the book. The most obvious there are Joe Biglow's kind of done at that point. Right. His stakes are not very high, although there is that weird sort of like, oh, do you want Tiff to be in the single boat? There's that kind of interesting moment. Biglow does plateau. There's not a lot of action, but we do have the sense that kind of like without the fixation of making the team, maybe he suffers a little bit from that. Tiff Wood's stakes are very high. Will he make a boat? Yeah. Brad Lewis's stakes are very high. Will he make a boat? And even more importantly, will he stuff it into the face of Parker? Parker's stakes are very high. Will his Olympic team fall apart, or will some semblance of a competitive team make it to Lake Geneva? Buscarin, he's got stakes. He's kind of always been the sort of odd man, like the character with the least attention too. And then the stakes reset for the Olympics too, because so Joe's stakes feel pretty high, John Biglow's stakes feel pretty high. His ending is very ambiguous and ambivalent. Tiff is kind of the tragic hero. Brad Lewis is the anti-hero who wins. Parker is the old man who's learned a lesson and is hopefully a little bit wiser. Unclear if that's the case. And Buscarin's going to med school. But they sort of reset for all of those people in a really, really interesting way, too. And so there's a way in which, even though it's kind of a globular cluster, you just have to pay attention to those 10, that math, that 5 by 2. And if you can track the 5 by 2, you're okay. You kind of get the structure of the book.
And my use of the globular cluster is the scenario, not his structuring of it. His structuring of it is fucking amazing.
It is. It turns into what the fantastic Mr. Fox would call a clustercus in the camp boat.
Yes, absolutely. Can we just get George Clooney to say clustercuss over and over again?
You cussing with me?
And I put in that question, and you already answered it. Does the change in mood affect the tone of voice? And I think it does. Yeah. And you pointed out there's sort of this there's this disapproval. There's sort of a gathering disapproval of the way that all of this has been handled. It kind of feels like, and a disapproval about the way that sport gets kind of commodified. I think that's sort of running alongside this whole thing. But yeah, I mean, this book moves from this very simple first half, and I think it is such a great lesson in structuring, to a much more messy scenario in the second half that Halberstam is still able to wrest, something really coherent out of,
and he keeps us
what must have been
oriented to the stakes, to that 5 by 2 at all times, and that's what's really masterful, and that's what it is a clustercuss, and yet his curation of the details that matter. It's still a very tight book and still very easy to read, and it's pretty extraordinary, that he can pull that off. And that the book still feels so readable despite, it almost to the point where it made me wonder, both in terms of the tone, that kind of dour disapproval, and also the kind of neatness of everybody's arc, the way that everybody has an arc. It made me wonder, did he take some liberties? Did he speculate a little bit? Did he, and do all 5 principals here... I was curious if any of them objected to the characterization of them, because they all are shown at moments in ways that are not admirable. And so I did some research. I read contemporary reviews. Many of them have given interviews. Brad Lewis has written several books. And none of them seem to have a major complaint with David Halberstam. And I don't know if that is the status of journalists was higher than, or maybe Halberstam's particular status, or if these guys feel like, well, whatever, he played us fair, and even if we're shown in a way that looks, embarrassing or not our best, that it's true, or maybe it's some combination of that, plus we're just glad somebody's paying attention to us in the press.
Yeah, which I'm sure it's a little of all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great things that he manages in this book, is that he really illustrates the messiness of human nature, and still that doesn't derail his narrative project, which is just how many, let's just dive into this is what you should do with a story. We're generally coached to keep the number of principles down, right? Yeah. Because why?
You can only relate to and pay attention to one protagonist, maybe 2, maybe 3 sometimes. The reader needs a thread through the narrative and needs somebody to relate to through the entire thing. Having one is the easiest and safest way to do it. Think about Snow Crash. They're 2 great protagonists. And
one of whom we are cued into that by his name.
Indeed. Yeah. And would that be as fun of a book if we're going to do a chapter from transubstantiation, the cabin boy, and then like the Asian cook who talks like a Los Angeles black man, or a narration from the gargoyle who gets killed by a raven. I mean, we dip into some of the other characters. There is actually a third semi-protagonist who is the hapless mafioso, but really.
Oh, that's right.
He's often a sort of lens for us to see YT more clearly, and Uncle Enzo. So I'm sort of spinning out of control here, but the simple answer to your question is simplicity.
Right. And maybe it's like probably your readers can hang with like 3 characters that you're going to differentiate effectively. Yeah. He just, this is nuts how well he is able. And I think, my question about form and function was about the short chapters. Yep. And I think that's one of the mechanisms where he uses to do this effectively.
Especially in the second half, usually each chapter is focusing on one of the characters.
And like they're like a page or two, maybe 500 words. They're very short chapters. It's a very non-standard book. Yeah. When you like actually sort of like get into the pages of it. But yeah, I think it's amazing what he pulls off. Like, it's really quite impressive. And the thing that you said about his narration, he's always so tasteful. He's always in the background. He never really inserts himself in there, except for the fact that you've noted that he is sort of this weirdly omniscient nonfiction narrator.
And he will go big. He will use big adjectives, and he will say things like, if rowing was an estimable sport filled with virtue and honor and strength, then there was something about the team camps that was the reverse of that, which is a big, broad sort of mid-century white man thing to say, or totally. Vin Scully thing to say, that, and it made me think, like, I don't know. Do you think this book could get like published today?
What I would be interested. Yes, I do think it could, but I think it would also be a casualty of the loss of the monoculture. Like, I think this probably, like, I'd be really interested to know how successful it was.
Yeah, would it get backed by a major publisher and promoted?
Totally.
Yeah.
Like, I think it would be part of that, like, incredibly fractured mediascape that we live in now. And, like, yes, it probably could get picked up by, like, Velo Press or something like that. Yeah. Like a tiny, very niche-y, publishing house, but it's not going to get picked up by, like, who is this? I was going to
Farrar
dig around and see who we are here.
William Morrow and Company. I don't know that William Morrow and Company. Are they a division?
Oh, a division of Random House. Yeah, it's Ballantine. Yeah, it's fairly.
Yeah, and Big Five.
I mean, this is you're not going to get picked up by one of them.
And that's what I mean. Probably. And I don't know. I don't know enough about the publishing industry. I could be completely wrong. But my sense is that this book is both too small and too big. That it is too big in its sort of like ambition at kind of making big, broad claims and poking at things, and then sort of too small in its focus. It's interesting because, like, Malcolm Gladwell sort of writes, but Malcolm Gladwell goes even bigger, and is more bombastic and is more, in some ways, is trying to tie. He would then compare this story to, like, some rowing in Greece in the original Olympics or something like that.
Totally,
And there is reporting, and yet it's too small. Like, you could profile the point guard of the Olympic basketball team, that could be a book. You could write a book about the 2016 Cubs. You could write a book about, any number of championship teams. Moneyball is maybe the kind of closest thing to this, but Moneyball has Michael Lewis is so great at pegs, which is like basically says, how does the worst team in baseball with the worst budget in baseball become the best team in baseball? And you're like, well, everybody wants to hear that story. I don't care what it is. There's got to be something.
And most of those examples that you just gave, are like, there's there's a very palpable victory.
Yeah.
At the end of it. And there is a victory here, but for the anti-hero, and it doesn't feel like a sport movie in the way that like the Moneyball story where you're like, oh my God, they pulled it off. And the same, and with the Cubs where you're like, there's also this thing about shedding, a century of futility and all of that stuff. But this book is just, it's such a tiny world. But he is able to draw like something really interesting out of it. But I think you're right. I don't think there's enough of a hook for it to have gotten published now. We're too, our attention span is too short for something this
And his voice is too muted. I think he's too subtle a writer for this day and age. I think people would find his prose a little bit boring. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that.
Yeah.
But
well, before we go to trivia, can we experience some more of that prose?
Yes.
And I want to read chapter 28, which is only a page.
It's like a little work of microfiction or a
it's so
short
good.
epic poem. Short, not epic.
It's weird. It's a weird chapter. But this is at the Olympics. Tifwood is there as the spare. On the Sunday of the finals, Tifwood got up very early. This was race day, but he was not going to race. He was full of purpose and absolutely without purpose in that which meant the most to him. He had always planned to make the Olympic race his last one and then retire. Earlier in the week, he had talked with Pat Walter, the Canadian spare, who was also a world-class oarsman, about having a race among the spares. It would liven things up a little, and it might give him a greater sense of belonging. They talked of getting the West German spare to join them. Walter was amenable to the idea, but he told Wood the choice was his. In the end, Wood decided that, since this was his last row, he did not want anything to disrupt his thoughts. This was a moment to have by himself. Walter sympathized, but in order to have some sense of excitement, they decided that Wood would go out exactly 2 minutes before Walter. That way they could clock each other and maintain some element of pressure. It was an odd row. When Wood went out, the weather was clear, and at the 1,000-meter mark, the fog came in so thick that he could not see. As he rode the last 1,000 meters wrapped in fog, he thought of what might have been, and he told himself that the important thing was to deal with his disappointment as a man, to be graceful and generous. That was what rowing was all about. It demanded so much in preparation that even if he fell short of his goals, he was not diminished as a person. He told himself this, but he found it hard to take much comfort from his own words. He had been a member of 3 Olympic teams without rowing 1 stroke. When he finished the 2,000 meters, he waited for Walter. 2 minutes passed. There was no sign of Walter. The Canadian, hit even harder by the fog, came in about 30 seconds later. No race there. Then Wood went back and started taking apart the rigging of his boat. He did it just when he knew John Biglow was going to race. He was immensely fond of John, but he could not bear to watch him row in the singles. It was simply too painful.
Portrait of a young man without purpose, with frustrated purpose, right? I want to just think it just made me, in the lyric, a pirate looks at 40, Jimmy Buffett sings, what's the lyric? Yes, I am a pirate, 200 years too late. The cannons don't thunder, there's nothing to plunder. I'm an over 40 victim of fate, arriving too late.
Oh, that's a great line.
It's this universal epic thing, and it's this utterly true moment, and it's beautifully written, and and it has the benefit of both being a beautiful spiritual moment and then also a beautiful physical moment, right? The fog rolling in midway through. Yeah. Did that really happen? And did Halberstam just instinctually sense that this is like what's happened to Tifwood, right? Like his path is clear. And then halfway through, suddenly he's in the fog and nothing seems to matter anymore. And he's torn, and all his tools that he tries to use to console himself are just not quite good enough.
Mm-hmm. And the currency that he has lived his life out of, which is pain, he cannot bring himself to experience the greatest pain.
Right.
Which is not physical.
Yeah.
Like it's,
No, right. We were told
like
the thing that makes him great is his ability to endure pain. And he cannot endure the pain of watching his best friend compete even though he wants to, he wants to,
he
doesn't
cares
want
about
to
him.
be bitter. He's probably not bitter. He probably is happy, for Biglow at some level, but also, too sad, too disappointed. Yeah. I read this contemporary review, and I don't remember who the writer was. It was in some newspaper. But then at the end, all the bad feelings suddenly dissipate. The coach embraces the pair he has rejected. People who have stopped talking to each other embrace and become friends again. There are no hard feelings, only nostalgia for the feel of the oars. Was that your feeling at the end of this?
No, it wasn't.
No. What he says after that hits me a little bit better. And the reader comes to realize that the conflicts weren't petty abrasions. They were the point of it all. We haven't been caught up in some extraneous theater that Halberstam has cleverly manufactured to retain our interest in the story, but rather in the drama of rowing itself and the psychology that makes competing possible. All of this, all of which explains why amateurs work so effectively with so few words to illustrate what might be the motto of rowing. It isn't how you played the game. It's whether you won that counts. I'm not sure though.
That feels more apt. The part about everybody forgiving each other feels less apt, and especially because we end on this note of Tiff deciding to invite Harry Parker to his wedding, and we don't know what happens.
No, I don't.
We could probably assume.
It reminds me of the end of Love Actually with Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson, right? Which is like the relationship continues. But and if you don't know, well, I won't tell you because you might want to watch that movie one day, even though it's not great. It's kind of great and not great.
It's a medley movie.
Yeah.
There are moments of greatness, but there is a lid on its potential.
Parts
greatness.
haven't aged well. That's part of it too.
That's for sure.
As I guess I don't have the sense, and even Parker to me. Slapping Enquist and Brad Lewis on the back, to me, is not a sign of any kind of reconciliation. To me, it's like...
It's relief.
Yeah, and also, like, maybe... Yeah, we got a medal, but also, I mean... It's... Yeah, I mean, it's like... to me, it almost feels selfish, right? Like Parker didn't back these guys, and they won, totally. And now he's taking the credit for it, as their coach. Now it does say that he did coach them once they got to the Olympics and tried to put aside his frustration at their challenge boat, too. And there is this sort of genteel quality. Parker will not tell somebody they can't compete in a challenge boat. He will say, I don't think that's a good idea, or I would prefer that you didn't do it. But he's not, he does seem to have this kind of like rules of engagement. So even though he plays favorites, he won't out and out trip somebody up,
which is a little doesn't feel genuine, like he's playing favorites, but isn't going to tell people that he's playing favorites,
Yeah, it's a little bit like the coach. I mean, he reminds me of like the coach who's sort of like, well, if anybody breaks training rules, you sit out a game, except for the slugger who hits 40 home runs. It feels like that kind of coaching to me. Yeah,
which is and I think you're right to like the ending of the ending of this book is really ambivalent.
Yeah,
I think
so.
And and just like and of course Halberstam finds the perfect quote to end with, which is like, if you want to get noticed, go hang out adjacent to a bigger sport. It's like
Cameras
these guys have been
go.
like this is such a book about ego in a sport where nobody cares. It's and that's the nature of the amateur. That's why these guys are still amateurs. And there's some great line in here about like the sport requiring more than it's worth.
Yeah.
And like that is such a like he does such a good summing up of the existence of rowing and whatnot. But
I asked you this last time, and I know we're wrapping up. But as an athlete, do you think that what these guys sacrificed to go to the Olympics was worth it for them?
Yes.
And why?
Because they're. I mean, the sport that I spent a lot of time in is similarly small. It's gotten a little bigger since I left, and it's growing up. It's becoming much more professional, but it's a very small, very niche sport. There isn't a lot of money, and similar to rowing, like you have to give so much of yourself to have just the slightest inkling of a possibility of success, and so any success that you can hang your hat on, whether it's going to the Olympics, whether it's being the spare, whether it's having a 4th place at the Olympics, whether it's finally being able to rest. I think Tiff Wood's tragedy in this book is that he does not get that.
Yeah.
He does not get the fulfillment of his effort.
Because he can't compete at all.
And right, which is the thing. There's this great passage which talks about the thing that Tiff Wood is great at is competing, and he can't compete. And I think that is probably why he probably leaves this whole situation feeling the worst. Bouskarin doesn't even get to go to the Olympics, right? He doesn't go in any other boat, I think.
I can't remember what I think. I don't think he. Yeah, he missed the double, and then I think he joined a challenge quad, and they didn't succeed.
Yeah,
something like that. He was not in the quad.
But
Tiff was the spare.
But he Bouskarin sort of loses fair.
Right.
Wood loses kind of unfairly, it feels like.
Not really unfairly, but more like his effort is wasted. Like he put his effort into the he put his cards, what's the word I'm looking? He bet on the wrong horse, or he put his eggs in the wrong basket. In one basket. Like he probably could have gone if he had done the work to become a better team racer.
Yeah, to be a better sweep oarsman or a multi-sculler or something like that. But I would guess that, and everything is softened with time, but even in the aftermath of these Olympics, I bet a lot of them would be like, I'm satisfied with what happened.
Do you think...
Because there is a payoff of the work that they put in.
Do you think that benefit is something that... It's sort of like, imagine winning a race, you feel great. Losing a race, you feel disappointed. Not winning, but having a good finish and racing better than you have in weeks, and knowing you put in a good effort that's how Joe Biglow feels, right? Like he doesn't get the bronze, but he feels like he raced well. Parker thinks so. His dad thinks so. And there's some consolation in that. So you have, basically what I'm saying is you have these ups and downs. Is there some other bracket feeling that you don't experience in that moment, but that you are experiencing or come to experience that is enriching, do you think?
As an athlete?
As an athlete. I guess what I'm saying is, even if you fail over and over and over again, that somehow that experience still better than living a life where you're not trying?
Yeah, I think so. But that was also my experience of sport. My best race was a 4th place finish.
Yeah.
And then my second best race was a 12th place finish. And I can contextualize those, and I can understand that those were the 2 greatest days of my athletic career, and I did very well on those days. And I can be very proud of that, while knowing that I didn't have the success that I wanted. But it's complicated. And I think that that's what this book does a really nice job of dramatizing, that complicated nature of can I feel good about this? Yeah. How am I going to feel good about this? I think is the big question. Because you have to. You have to find a way to feel good about all of these hours.
Yeah, well, again, that's sort of part of what I'm getting at, is that I have done a little bit of endurance athleticism, but not much. And when I used to run a lot, I ran because it felt good. Like, and I would sometimes push myself to the point where it was hard. But I mostly, like, if I went for a run in the afternoon, I mostly ran at the pace my body wanted to run. And sometimes I felt particularly strong. And there were a few times when I raced and, like, felt strong and, like, raced pretty well. But that's different than what these people are actively pushing themselves past the point of comfort. And most of the sports I play, I enjoy while I'm doing them. I play Ultimate Frisbee. I am having fun while I play. I would like to win the game, and sometimes I get annoyed if I'm playing poorly or if I'm playing well and my teammates are playing poorly, especially if they're playing lazily poorly. So I'm subject to that too, but the actual act of playing is fun. The act of surfing is fun. Riding a mountain bike on a semi-challenging but not scary course is fun. Trail running is fun for me when I'm not in pain. Whereas I don't have the sense that these guys really like getting up at 5 a.m. and cramming their giant frames into a tiny skull and shoving their knees into their nose over and over again and doing sprints, although they sort of miss it too. So I guess that's sort of what I'm getting at is, like, where is the enrichment? Because most of them don't win.
Right. And
they seem to only care about winning while they're doing it. And, what you're saying is that there is a way in which I guess part of maybe what I'm asking is, does the value manifest later in sort of the memory of it and the way in which it's become part of the fabric of you? Is that where the joyful part comes? Yeah,
that's where some of the joy comes from, for sure. But then I would also remind us of that passage in The Rider where he's talking so much about, and this has become one of the problems of contemporary endurance sport, where what most people, as far as I can tell, a lot of people want to just simply say that they did a thing. Yeah. And so there is a lot of this, like, one and done nature in endurance sport. They want the picture at the finish line. And the finisher medal, and they want to be able to say that they did an Ironman.
Accomplishment.
And Tim Krabbe would be like, no, I do it because it's road racing. Yeah. Which is such a tautology. Like, there's no definition in there about why. Right. Like, he's simply saying, like, basically 1 equals 1, and I'm not going to go any further than that. But what he's trying to express, and I think that the nature of a lot of endurance athletes and these guys and endurance athletes that I know, there's something of the I just can't help myself.
It seems to me, I mean, the way that I would frame it and the way I've experienced it is it's the excitement. It's almost like the adrenaline. It's the feeling of caring so much about something and wanting so much to win that you will be crushed if you lose, and you will be exalted if you win. But then there's also sort of a bracket around that you don't want to live a life where you're not feeling the potential for crushed or exalted. You want your life to contain those highs and lows, and you experience them and they're real, but still there's something about being in that space of competition that is enriching. Yeah, I think.
And I think that, a piece of this story is sort of dramatizing that darker side of endurance sports, where it's like everybody wants to be in a Joseph Campbell's setting, but that's impossible when you're all like, not everybody gets to kill Grendel if you're all trying to kill Grendel.
No, and one way of looking at it is like, what would be more impressive than being part of a quad or, an 8 shell? And coordinating your efforts with 3 other equal athletes better than anybody else in the world could coordinate their efforts. And that, to me, is sort of the tragedy of the book, which is that they all see that as a consolation prize, whereas to me, that's sort of the most impressive thing they could do.
Yeah, totally. It's one of the reasons why cycling, I do think, rises above other sports, because it is a sport where the team creates the opportunity for the individual.
And the strategy is more interesting. Sculling, you kind of have pacing strategy, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's like, as far as you can tell, like, it's just like
row pretty hard until you decide to row really hard.
Really hard, and then throw up. Yeah. It's just like...
And there's a little bit of strategy of, like, when you switch from pretty hard to really hard. That's like the only real strategy that I can tell. And it's like, don't do it too early, but don't do it too late.
Too late. And it's like even less compelling than like the 1500 on the track, which is probably the closest analog time-wise. And because in the 1500 on the track, there is drafting, you're in close competition. But like, I mean, like rowing, you're just separate. There's no drafting. It's just like, just fucking go. Like go straight. And I know it's not straight, but anyway, we should probably head to trivia. But I do think, I think that was a really good question to end on, because I think that's what this book, Halberstam is an outsider here. And you get the sense that he's fascinated by these athletes that are very different from the other athletes that he has chronicled in his other sports writing. And it makes sense to me that he did the reporting afterwards. Like somebody told him this and he was like, wait, what? And then what happened? And then what? And then who is this Lewis character?
He watched the Olympics. I think he saw the McDonald's commercial and watched the Olympics on TV, and he was horrified by how little attention and how poorly treated. And I think he knew a little bit about crew. Like maybe he had rowed in college or something. But
will you read this book again?
I don't think so, unless I'm teaching a nonfiction writing class. Because I think this would be a great book for students to read and think about when it comes to things like mood, voice structure, tone of voice, and also kind of like where the narrator is placed, like inside the character, outside, above. I don't know what the term for that is, but it's like the difference between close and far, I guess. How about you?
I think, so I really enjoyed the fact that like I had forgotten who won the trials. And I really do. This book is very dear to me because it was the first book that I read that accurately dramatized something that I've experienced. And that being the horror of standing on a start line, knowing that you've been working towards this moment and you can't quit before you start, though your entire body is telling you, please don't do this. And that was really nice to experience that. I love the writing, so I'm probably going to wait like 10 years and like hopefully forget who won and then read it again. But you're right, it is also a perfect teaching book. So if I ever find myself teaching a comp class, this would definitely be part of it.
All right, so trivia. Brad Lewis, Olympic gold medalist. Is that what you say? Medalist? Yeah. Along with Enquist, has written several books, including his first book that was originally called Assault on Lake Casitas, basically his perspective on these events. He later renamed it, and this should say something about his personality, to Olympian. I'm pretty sure that Brad Lewis is one of those people who you cannot have a conversation with and not have him mention that he won an Olympic gold medal, in 1984 to this day. He's still around. He's still in Southern California. I think he self-publishes his books. He certainly promotes them himself, and the grammar of the promotion is not great, although there's a certain charm to it, which is very much like the Brad Lewis that we get, sort of rough around the edges but charming. After winning an Olympic gold medal with Paul Enquist, he continued to compete in other sports. Which of the following is not a competitive activity that he engaged in? A. In 1990, he attempted to set the fastest hiking time on the John Muir Trail self-supported style, which means he can do mail drops, shopping trips, but there's no support vehicle, and he has to carry all of his own supplies. B, he was the crew on the St. Francis Yacht Club, which is the San Francisco Yacht Club's competitive boat in the 1986 America's Cup. C, he coached the Santa Barbara rowing team in 1993, UC Santa Barbara rowing team in 1993-1994, later describing the team as the worst program in the country, bar none. And D is a joke, but he attempted to beat Horace Bury's space yacht recording of crossing from Mars to Jupiter single-handed. But since since obviously that one is one of the ones he did not do, so don't choose that one. That's just there for you to chuckle at.
So he did two of these, but he didn't do one of them.
Correct.
Okay. So coach the UCSB team, fastest known, John Muir, self-supported. What was the other one?
Crew on the St. Francis Yacht Club's competitive boat in the 1986 America's Cup, which is a sailing race.
Yeah. Is St. Francis... Isn't the America's Cup conducted among nations?
Maybe.
I'm gonna go with that one. I'm gonna go with the St. Francis Yacht Club.
Well, according to his book, Confessions of a Grinder, he was a crew on the St. Francis Yacht Club's competitive boat in the 1986 America's Cup, at least on the Amazon page for the boat. He has hiked the John Muir Trail, but never attempted to set a record, although it is in line with his personality. And he did coach the Santa Barbara rowing team in 93-94 and later described the team as the worst program in the country, bar none, and wrote a thinly veiled novel about a middle-aged Olympic gold medalist who is hired to coach a Central California rowing team in the 1990s and has to deal with like the foibles of students who all have. One of the details from the book is that all of his students have medical marijuana cards, which was kind of unusual. This was before legalization in the 90s, which he saw as a sign of kind of laziness and.
That one, I was like, okay, he definitely did that one. So I was definitely deciding between the Yacht Club and.
Let me see if I can find Confessions of a Grinder, Brad Lewis.
Oh my God,
okay, yeah. If you Google it, Confessions of a Grinder, my first-person account of competing in the America's Cup as a grinder on board the 12-meter USA from the St. Francis yacht. Ellipsis, really cool. 1986-87 Fremantle, Australia. That's the title. Or that's the subtitle.
That's incredible. That is an amazing subtitle.
Yeah. Well, I'm realizing now that the Amazon added the ellipsis. The actual subtitle is my first-person account of competing in the America's Cup as a grinder on board the 12-meter USA from the St. Francis Yacht Club back when America's Cup was really, really cool. 1986 and 1987. And I realize now
more subtitles like that?
It is apparently... the St. Francis Yacht Club might have been the yacht club that furnished the boat for America's team and America's Cup.
Got it. Yeah, and the other way where I was like, maybe I'm wrong here is like, of course, like at all of these regattas, there's always the big race that we all see on TV, but there's always like hundreds of other tiny races, and so who knows? Maybe at that one there's other ones, but. That's a very that's like an 18th century subtitle.
In which the author participates as
totally. Yeah, exactly. Gulliver's Travels, or
time that the author visited people who were very large and also very small, and other very diverse little. Observations and travels amidst the South Pacific. Yeah,
exactly. So David Halberstam, as we've talked already in this episode, has written extensively on American history and culture, war, and sport. The Amateurs in his sports book is an outlier because Halberstam has predominantly focused his sports writing on baseball, as you and I both know, and traditionally popular American sports. So, which of the other big four sports did Halberstam not write about? And just like yours, I have a joke in mind. So the D is he certainly didn't. But out of A, B, and C, there's one of these sports that he did not write about. So A, American football. B, hockey. C, basketball. Or D, the estimable sport of puppeteer roping.
Puppeteer roping. Oh yeah, that would be fun. They got two heads. So.
No, well, not for the puppeteer.
Oh yeah.
Like not only being strangled, but also being like
wouldn't
your
actually
hand is
strangle it, right? Because but you don't want to get too close to the puppeteer; it'll kick you with the back leg. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like emu.
Exactly. I think I remember that he wrote a book about basketball. Has he written about hockey? I feel like hockey would appeal to him. My gut is telling me hockey is the one he also wrote about, leaving football. But it doesn't make sense. I think I'm going to go with a gut. He did not write about football.
He did write about football. He wrote an odd profile of Bill Belichick called "The Education of a Coach."
Interesting.
But you're totally right on basketball. He wrote two big books about basketball. One a profile of Jordan. One just called "The Breaks of the Game." But he never wrote about hockey. 3 baseball books. 2 basketball books.
That's logical, because, I mean...
1 football book and a rowing book.
Yeah. I, as a teenager, read his Summer 49 book, like my parents gave it to me.
Oh, it's so good. That book is... everybody read that book. It's so good.
Yeah. It's
his
good
book,
American
The
history,
Teammates...
too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great... Yeah, if you want to learn about what America was like in the late 40s, like, that's
celebrity
a great book
culture, just sort of post-integration... Right, one of the characters is Don Newcomb, who's like the 3rd black player, or something like that, as I recall. Yeah,
it's a killer book.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's like one of those unputdownable books.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's a sports book, but it's not.
Well,
yeah. What's up next?
What is up next is Where Nobody Knows Your Name, John Feinstein. The late John Feinstein?
I don't know. Is John Feinstein
No,
dead?
I might be thinking of the other kind of like NPR commentator. No, John Feinstein is in fact dead. Oh, this year.
He is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do recall.
This year.
Yeah. The late John Feinstein's book, Where Nobody Knows Your Name.
Oh, well, that's sad. He is an excellent writer.
Yeah.
And
are we doing that in 1 or are we doing it in 2?
I think we should do it in 2. It's like 400
Okay,
pages.
so the first half.
It's a solid
coming up
book,
next is the
half.
first half of John Feinstein's Where Nobody Knows Your Name.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes beat on, boats against the current, podcasting ceaselessly into the past. That's so true. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by me, Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. You can find us on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support.
And a reminder, Chris and I are both writers and editors and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. And probably by the time this comes out, we'll have fresh meat because we got a draft coming up in 2 weeks, but it will probably have happened by the time this comes out. And so check the website for all the new books and or movies and or other media to consume and enjoy with your pals at Upper Middlebrow.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.